Good morning, pipe smokers. Prairie Piper here. Just smoking a bowl of Haunted Bookshop. It's not a very good match. Smoking some Haunted Bookshop in my 7 Alley Punta Oral. It's kind of one of my go-to pipes. Got a cup of coffee here. It's a nice, beautiful summer day. I guess it's technically still not fall, but we're getting there. You can probably hear the wind in the back. You might hear some geese honking overhead. Um, Maybe some squirrels chirping. Might also hear some planes flying overhead and motorcycles out on the highway. It's not that close, but some of those things are pretty loud. I think the wind's blowing this way. So I wanted to continue our review of the Legend series by Brigham, but I didn't receive my tins until yesterday. So I went to Thomas Hines in Winnipeg and picked them up. So the next review will be the Legend series Aurora Borealis, which is the mimic, the clone to Nightcap. So we will be doing that next Saturday. I'm going to smoke the Aurora Borealis all week, starting today. And then I've smoked Nightcap. I mean, who hasn't? So I'm pretty familiar with this, but I still will open the tin and we'll do a comparison of the Dunhill Nightcap and see how it compares to the clone by Brigham Aurora Borealis. But the title of this video, as you may have seen, is popular Canadian or famous Canadian pipe smokers. And rather than just kind of run down a list of like, showing you pictures and say, hey, this guy smoked a pipe, that guy smoked a pipe, I thought it'd be interesting to just do a few of the ones that are kind of important to me, important to kind of Canadian culture in terms of, like the books that they've written or articles and kind of impact that they've had on um, Canada as a whole and Canadian culture. So let me, I won't be smoking the pipe too much, but I kind of want to get a couple more puffs in before I start because as many a presenter have said, it's difficult to talk and smoke at the same time. Some people are actually pretty good at it. I'm not. So, and I'm not going to give like a whole bio on these guys, but just kind of a quick overview. I might read some passages just so you can kind of get a feel, get a grip on what the writing's like, and if it's something that may or may not interest you, whether you're Canadian or not. Some of these books are they're great. I mean, these are some of the heavy hitters in Canadian literature and Canadian history. So that's good, but I guess I got to put it down. So I need two hands. The first Canadian pipe smoker that I'd like to talk about was a man named Sir Cecil Denny. Born in England in 1850, died in Edmonton in 1928. But shortly after he was born, he moved to Canada, like a lot of Brits did back in the 19th century. Um, and he was an officer in the Long March West with the Northwest Mounted Police. And the Northwest Mounted Police, which eventually became the Royal Canadian Mounted Police a couple decades later, I think around the 1900s. This force was created by John A. Macdonald in 1873 to basically bring law and order to the Canadian West. One event in particular, which is known as the Cypress Hills Massacre. This can be a complicated story, but I'll try to keep it simple with still doing it some justice to what happened because it was a massacre. So um, there was no forts in Saskatchewan. There was no forts really in Alberta. It was kind of wide open prairie land. There was a border that ran. It was called the boundary line at the time, and it was kind of a loose border. It's the one that's still the border today, but it was called the boundary line. It was kind of a loose at the time in the 1870s, sort of a loose boundary between that the American and the British governments agreed was kind of where they draw the line. But there was really, there was not a lot of people living in the prairies in Canada at this time. but there were a lot of forts, trading forts, particularly in Alberta, and a lot of that was driven the by people in Montana, Americans in Montana, Fort Benton. So the Cypress Hills massacre basically was American traders came up, American traders came up, were trading in the area in and around Alberta. Might be around the border between Alberta and Saskatchewan. Well, what's the border, the provincial border today? And they had some horses stolen. And they basically confronted this native tribe that was in the neighborhood at the time, in and around the area, and they said, "Hey, did you steal our horses? Someone stole our horses. I don't appreciate this." The native said, "No, it wasn't us. It might have been another tribe," because lots of different tribes in this area at that time, right? Not just one or two. There's lots. So they said, "Well, it wasn't us." And anyways, as often seems to happen in the Old West movies, and I guess in real life, there's an argument that breaks out and shooting starts. Not all of the American, let's call them American. There were Canadians and there were Métis in there too, so it wasn't just Americans, but it was American wolfers that were coming up trading whiskey and to the natives, which was illegal at that time, and wolf skins as well. And so that company was made up of Métis, some Canadians, but primarily Americans from Fort Benton, from Montana. And some of the guys stayed back, and they were apparently on a higher ridge and kind of ready to go if something happened. They looked down upon the down below the ridge and saw things were getting heated. Next thing you know, people start shooting, so they start volleying shots into the camp. Long story short, accounts vary, but it's no less than 20. Could be as high as 40. It sounds like around 30 may have been. But it's kind of seems to be 20 to 30 seems to be a settled upon point that men, women, and children that were in that native encampment were killed, slaughtered by all the volleys coming in from the top. So all hell breaks loose. People start shooting. People start fighting, and it created such a massive frenzy as it would with a massacre like that, especially with women and children, that Prime Minister John A. Macdonald in Ottawa said, "Well, we've got to do something about this. We need to secure the West, the Canadian West. We've got to stop these American and the illicit whiskey trade." And it wasn't just the Americans. I don't want to make this thing like it was an American thing. I'm sure there was Canadians doing it too. In fact, there was. But a lot of it was coming up from Montana. So they said, "We've got to stop this." And the solution was to create a paramilitary force called the Northwest Mounted Police that would basically start in Fort Dufferin, meet up at Fort Dufferin, which is, the fort's still there. It's just outside Emerson. Emerson's a border town between Manitoba and North Dakota. And it's a National Historic Site. I was there, and I'd like to take you guys there to show you around. They're redoing it. I will take you guys down there. It's actually really cool. I'll do maybe a pipe review down there. They actually got a bunch of clay pipes in the little museum down there. But they assemble there, and then they basically start marching west. And as they get further and further into the prairies, they set up forts, right? So there's a government presence there, not to only bring law and order, to make sure that the natives are not abused and there's nothing going on that shouldn't be, that's illegal. But it also was to establish settlements so that the Americans couldn't kind of just come up and have squatters' rights. And a lot of this was taking place primarily, I think, in Calgary. Calgary really, as a cattle town, became a cattle town because of people who lived in Fort Benton in Montana. So I don't know if a lot of Canadians even know that. Calgary was basically started by Americans coming up and bringing up their cattle to graze. So Canadian government says we got to put an end to that, and that's when the Northwest Mounted Police come. Cecil Denny, pipe smoker, wrote a book here. He was an officer in what's called the Long March West. So that was these soldiers assembled, the Northwest Mounted Police, the paramilitary unit, dressed in red, for the red of the redcoats, the British Empire. to leave Fort Dutton and march across the prairies on this pretty crazy, horrendous journey, and it's all documented in here, to basically establish themselves in the Canadian prairies. So I'll just read to you what this looked like. So there was 300 men in total, 10 horses, 142 oxen, 114 carts, 73 wagons, 33 head of cattle, 2 9-pound guns, and 2 mortars. We carried a 6-month supply of tea, sugar, flour, biscuits, and bacon, besides baggage, ammunition, and forage. Also supplies of tobacco, matches, and other small articles. And apparently so imagine this huge army snaking, well, not huge, but I mean, huge by our standards here in Canada, and nobody had seen anything like this on the prairies. So apparently it was up to 2 miles long, snaking through the prairies as they left Fort Dufferin. But the day before they left Fort Dufferin, there was this crazy storm that hit, and I just kind of want to put things into perspective for what these men had to do. So this was the day before they were going to leave to go from Fort Dufferin all the way across the prairies into Fort Whoop-Up, and they all the way basically to the base of the Rocky Mountains. On the night of the 21st of June, a terrible storm struck our camp, accompanied by wind and hail. Nearly all the tents went down. The horses were picked to long, heavy lines stretched over posts. Over 200 broke loose and stampeded through the camp, overturning wagons, flattening the tents, and knocking down and severely injuring several of the men. Confusion reigned. Ebon darkness split by vivid lightning, stinging hail, and the charge of maddening horses created pandemonium not easily forgotten. The thunder was deafening, making it almost impossible to give orders. Officers and men alike were partly dressed, but there was panic, and 2 of my constables, Wild and Francis, with 3 other constables, Oliver, Barton, and Sinclair, managed to secure the horses, and mounting bareback, followed after the racing herd in the darkness. The darkness was so dense, however, that they could see nothing, and soon returned. We passed a miserable night in the open, but when morning dawned, warm and bright, we dried our clothes, repitched the camp, and soon were once more our cheerful selves. Now, I know on the surface, right, you have to put things into perspective here. Right on the surface, a real bad storm. I've watched many storms from the front of my window in my house, and watched the trees bend over, hail come down, hail. You can hear the hail smacking the rooftop seat, bouncing off the streets, lightning, thunder. But imagine doing that in the middle of nowhere. Like, there's no light, right? It's pitch black. So imagine you're in the middle of a hailstorm, hail's raining down, the wind is blowing everything around, the tents are gone, the horses are rampaging, and it's pitch black, right? And there's no residual light from like a neighboring town. There are no towns. And even if they were, right, I mean, there was no modern electricity, right? There's no ambience from the cities. There's nothing. It's just blackness. So it's incredible. That's just one example of, and there's many more of locusts. They run into locusts, they can't, locusts so thick it's like a wall, you can't even see by it. Bridges collapsing, flash flooding, other storms, and, throughout the prairies. The cold, they almost died, when the winter hit, towards the end. I mean, cattle started dying, horses started dying. They weren't used to that climate because the horses were brought from out east. So really, really, really good read. And it doesn't read like, it's not a biography. I mean, I guess it is a biography. It's a journal, but it's not a boring journal. Some journals talk about daily things and it's just monotonous. Yeah, I got up, I shaved, I had a hot bath, blah, blah, blah. Super boring. This is a fairly quick read. It's well written, it's informative, and it's one of the best accounts on the Long March West, that opened up and helped bring law and order to the Canadian West. Again, Northwest Mounted Police, which became the kind of a national symbol now, the RCMP, Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And here's a picture of Cecil Denny, smoking his pipe there. Looks like could be a Peterson. So this is a really good book. I highly recommend it. Again, nice read, quick, easy read. It's about 300 pages. The second one that I'd like to, second pipe smoker that I'd like to let you guys know what is a guy named, a journalist named Bruce Hutchison. This guy's a bit of a Canadian icon. He was a member of the Order of Canada, which is kind of the highest recognition you can get. I think the highest is the Merit of Canada, but member of the Order of Canada. He was born in 1901 and he died in 1992. Born in Prescott, Ontario, died in Victoria, BC. And he wrote this book, his first book, believe it or not, called The Unknown Country. It was written in 42, basically to give Canada a sense of national identity, right? It's 42, it's World War II. I guess you could kind of consider it, it's not propaganda, but it wasn't uncommon for a lot of writers, newspapers, publishing houses to in trying to rally the countries. England did the same thing. They had a series of books, I can't remember what they're called, but by a lot of famous writers and poets to put out stuff that was, about the national culture in England, to sort of show what's worth fighting for and sort of differentiating between what the Nazis were in Europe and who we are. And this is kind of similar in that sense. He travels the country from one end to the other and basically talks about his experiences in the cities and the provinces that he passes through. Incredible writer, very articulate. Kind of the guy that, after reading like the first chapter or two, you're like, man, I wish I could write like that. And before each chapter, he has this really kind of poetic description of the land that he's now going to enter. And I'll just read you this. This is him entering the prairies. I think at this point he's just coming into Manitoba, into Winnipeg. And fittingly entitled The Geese. You might hear some geese sooner or later. As the geese are really kind of synonymous, right, with fall. A band of geese went north today. They were high up in a little black V in the sky, but we could hear their honking. George Padway stopped his plowing and looked up, following the flight of geese until they disappeared over the hill. The woman next door gazed over her clothesline, a wet shirt in her hand, and watched the flight. Old Jim Barlow, bent double with rheumatism, craned his neck to see. The children playing in the sand pile stopped for a moment and pointed. All over Canada, the geese are going north. In the natural channel of the prairies between lake and mountain, you can hear their thousands at dusk, honking high, and then the intimate whisper of wings as they come down to land. In the autumn, they will come again at evening drop down to rest in the stubble fields. From the distance, you can see them feeding on scattered grains of wheat, or you may find a solemn pair swimming in a puddle, but you will never get close to them. They are wild and will never come close to man, whom they do not trust, which is, this is written in 42. A lot of geese are very tame now, so that doesn't stand true today. But I mean, 1942, a lot of these animals are still truly wild. Nothing can tame them, nothing deflects them from their course. Every spring they head northward and south each autumn. The Canada goose, noblest of birds, everywhere, but especially along the long, lonely prairies, men look up and watch them and never tire of sight. In the flight of the geese, they see the thing that everywhere is withheld from man. Without compass, without knowledge of geography or power of reason, the geese move certainly over the thousands of miles of their habitation. No doubt here, no fear, no bewilderment. And men doubtfully always, afraid always, and in their civilization, completely wildered, see the geese, and they know that here is something, a freedom, a surety that they had once long ago, but have mislaid in the glut of living. This was a bestseller of its time. I highly recommend it. It's probably considered outdated now because it's heavy into political, a national culture. I'm not sure. Some of his books are still being reproduced. I don't know if this one is. but this Canadian legend, won a lot of awards. Check him out. The only pipe smoking picture I've been able to find of him is on one of his books, so this is all I got. There he is. That's one of his, I believe that's his last book, called The Unfinished Country. It was written in the 80s. There's one picture of him I found on YouTube, but it wasn't as clear as this. So there's Canadian pipe smoker number 2, journalist, writer. And second of 4 is a man named Charles Lynch, also a journalist, writer, more of a newspaper man. He was born in 1919 in Cambridge, Massachusetts in the US, but 2 weeks later moved to St. John's, New Brunswick. And he died in 1994. He was 74. He was also part of the Order of Canada, won a number of awards. He accompanied the troops on the D-Day landing at Juno Beach, which was pretty cool. And he also reported for a number of months on the trials of Nuremberg. So this is another highly recommended book. This one's out of print. I had to buy this. I actually found it at a used bookstore, but you can find used copies online. Don't pay too much for it. It's a good book, but I mean, probably not worth more than $20. You can see him there smoking a pipe. He's got his harmonica in the back. Here's the other picture of him playing a harmonica, and he's got his pipe tucked in his, looks like his upper pocket there on his jacket, his tweed jacket. This guy was an old school journalist, very easy to read. And I'll just read you just a portion here of what he's got. So in regards to sort of what the book is about. He says, this book then is about the joys and otherwise of being a journalist and about the people I have known, with a few prime ministers thrown in. Prime ministers aren't people, nor do I claim to have known them very well. People stop being people when they become prime minister. They turn into something else, just as they begin to look like the character the cartoonists do of them. And nobody gets to know them after they become prime minister. You may have known them before, but once they get the royal jelly into them, forget it. Though they themselves may want to keep some old relationship alive on the theory that high places are lonely places, or as John F. Kennedy once said, that the presidency is a poor place for making new friends, so I'd like to keep a few of the ones I have. Over the years, I have covered 7 prime ministers and written millions of words about them without ever really knowing them. 2, John Diefenbaker and Lester Pearson, were treasured and admired friends before they became party leaders. We called them John and Mike, but all that ended when they reached the summit, and both of them wound up their political careers damning my name. So this is a super cool book. It kind of gives you a behind-the-scenes look at, and this is old school again. This is kind of like traveling around with prime ministers and other journalists. Scotch, cigars, pipe smoking, late nights, prostitutes in some cases, sort of like the dark, seedy things that happen. It's not like a tabloid. He's not tattletaling per se. It's just his experiences, but it's done very tastefully. So Charles Lynch, recommend. He's got a few books as well. Another classic pipe smoker. Again, these are people that were culturally influenced, Canada during their time. Last one is, and a lot of Canadians are going to know this, a lot of Americans, is Farley Mowat. He's kind of a giant in Canadian literature. He was born in 1921 in Belleville, Ontario, and he died in 2014. He was 92. His books were translated into 52 different languages. He sold 17 million books. He's also part of the Order of Canada. He has a ton of books. He was also considered an environmentalist, huge on the environment. He would go and study animals up in the Arctic. He loved the Arctic in particular. A lot of his stories take place in the Arctic. Distinctly Canadian as well. Great writer. I recently read this book, And No Birds Sang, which is his personal account. He was in the military, World War II. This is his personal account. It's 200 pages. It's a quick read. His personal account of landing in Sicily with the Allies, and then going on to mainland Italy where a lot of, there's some fierce fighting there up in the mountains. I'll just read you kind of the back of the book. In July 1942, Farley Mowat was an eager, idealistic lieutenant, barely out of his teens, bound for England on a troop ship, impatient to see action and unafraid of death. But savage fighting in Sicily and long, torturous struggle through the bloody mountains of Italy quickly shattered his illusions of romance and adventure. And No Bird Saying is one survivor's searing indictment of the atrocity of war. This is a great book. I highly recommend it to anyone that's just interested in that time period. It's I typically stay away from biographies and journals. I just showed you two journals, The Long March West and this one, but they're so well done. They just smooth stories. The narrative's great. They don't give you a lot of they don't bog you down in day-to-day stuff that's just minute and boring like some biographies or journals. It's really kind of this one in particular is really just action-packed, and the only picture. I don't know if a lot of these images got scrubbed. Like Farley Mowat, I looked a few years ago, and Farley Mowat had tons of pictures with his pipe in his mouth all over the place. Now they're hard to find, so I don't know if somebody's scrubbing them or removing them. I know that this is all I got. This is, hopefully you can see the glare there. That's him smoking pipe. My understanding is he smoked a pipe most of his life. So there's the four for now. I might do this again later, but again, it's hard finding images with these guys smoking their pipes. But hopefully you enjoyed that. So that was Cecil Denny, story about his experience with the Northwest Mounted Police, the early days of Northwest Mounted Police, who they actually also fought in the Boer War. Bruce Hutchison, Canadian legend, journalist, huge in the landscape of Canadian journalism. Charles Lynch, again, another big player for in journalism over the last 50 years, maybe not so much today. And of course, Farley Mowat, who's really part of the genetic code of Canada. I used to read his books were everywhere as a kid. I don't know if that's still the case, but anyways, hope you enjoyed that. Next week, Brigham series is coming back, the Legend series. We are going to do Aurora Borealis and Nightcap, which Aurora Borealis, as noted, is the clone for Dunhill Peterson Nightcap. So until then, enjoy your weekend. Take care.